Imagine waking up one morning to a global news alert that makes you question everything you thought you knew about electric vehicles. A quiet workshop in Africa, not Silicon Valley, not Shanghai, not Berlin, has just produced a bus that costs only $5,000 and never needs to be charged. A vehicle that powers itself. A machine that could end fuel costs, eliminate the need for charging stations, and flip the entire EV world upside down. And what's truly shocking is this. The giants didn't see it coming. The story begins inside a small, unassuming warehouse on the outskirts of Harare. No billion-dollar labs. No futuristic glass towers. Just a handful of engineers, a few metal benches, and a dream that most experts dismissed as impossible. But inside that workshop, something extraordinary was taking shape, a self-powered transportation system that could operate entirely off-grid. The prototype looked deceptively simple. A lightweight frame, a compact battery, and a mysterious energy module mounted beneath the floor. But anyone who stepped inside felt something different. Silence, but not the silence of a dead engine. It was the silence of a machine that didn't need fuel, didn't need charging, and didn't rely on the grid in any way. The first time the team switched it on, it didn't roar to life. It hummed, a soft, steady resonance, like the vibration of hidden power pulsing through the chassis. Then the wheels began to turn. Word spread quickly. Local officials came to see it. Then engineers. Then journalists. And eventually, whispers reached the ears of the global EV titans who quietly dismissed the project as local hype. But that changed the moment Africa invited the world to a private demonstration. A dusty test track was suddenly packed with cameras, drones, and industry analysts clutching notebooks. The engineers stood calmly as skeptics prepared their questions. The bus sat quietly in the middle of the field, doors open, lights glowing faintly, waiting. The ignition was touched. The hum returned. It moved smooth, steady, and effortlessly. No exhaust. No solar panels. No external power source. Just constant motion. 10 laps. 20. 50. The bus maintained speed, temperature, and stability using only its built-in system. No charging breaks. No loss of power. Reporters ran out of questions. The analysts ran out of explanations. And for the first time in a long time, the EV giants were silent. Behind the scenes, a group of foreign observers made private calls, whispering to their headquarters. Some offered partnerships. Others offered money. A few quietly suggested buying the entire project just to shelve it. But the response from Africa was firm. This technology belongs to the continent that built it. Meanwhile, word of the $5,000 price tag spread like wildfire. Social media exploded. Ordinary people imagined a world where public transport no longer depended on diesel prices or rolling blackouts. A world where rural villages could run buses without ever needing a power grid. A world where transportation was no longer a luxury, but a right. But as the bus completed its final lap on the test track, something even more surprising happened. The engineers invited a group of passengers, teachers, mechanics, and school children to board. The idea was simple: test stability under real-world conditions. What happened next was captured on a single drone shot that went viral. The bus drove uphill, loaded with passengers, without slowing down. Then downhill, conserving energy, without overheating. It turned sharply, accelerated, decelerated, and continued running as if power were infinite. And that was when one of the engineers stepped forward and revealed the most important detail yet. The internal system wasn't even running at full capacity. The crowd froze. Analysts stared. A few whispered the same unsettling question. If this is the low-power version, what does the full system look like? At that moment, Africa realized it wasn't just testing a bus. It was testing independence, technological independence that could redefine transportation for generations. And far away, in the boardrooms of the world's largest EV companies, executives finally understood the danger. They were no longer competing with factories. They were competing with innovation that didn't follow their rules. A week after the viral test drive, the world received an unexpected message. Africa's engineering team scheduled a global live stream, one that every major automaker, government agency, and tech firms scrambled to watch. No trailers, no teasers, no time to prepare. Just a countdown timer and a promise. The real demonstration begins now. When the stream went live, the camera didn't show a lab or a stage. It showed a massive, empty runway, 5 kilometers long, stretching into the horizon. The air shimmered with heat. Security drones hovered overhead. Engineers moved with quiet confidence, setting up what looked like diagnostic towers and energy meters. Then the bus rolled into view. This time, it wasn't the prototype. It was a polished, production-ready model. Sleek white panels, aerodynamic edges, reinforced tires, and a glowing blue strip across the sides. Subtle, but futuristic. Designed not for show, but for mass deployment. A voice echoed through the speakers, calm and controlled. Today you will see what major automakers said was impossible. The bus accelerated down the runway, smooth as water. At the halfway mark, a digital meter displayed its internal power levels, still rising, not falling. Analysts watching the stream blinked, leaned forward, and replayed the numbers. The bus was generating more energy than it was consuming. That alone should have broken the internet. But then the engineers pushed further. They triggered a stress mode. The bus accelerated again, faster than a typical city bus should. Cameras zoomed in as dust kicked up behind the tires. The internal battery indicator remained stable, then climbed even higher. Reporters around the world typed furiously. Engineers whispered frantically. Energy experts shook their heads. Vehicle propulsion systems weren't supposed to do this. Machines weren't supposed to power themselves and still have surplus. But Africa wasn't just proving a point. Africa was making a declaration. And just when viewers thought the test was over, something even more shocking happened. The technicians placed 3 fully loaded cargo trailers behind the bus, nearly 12 tons of weight. Any normal electric vehicle would stall, drain instantly, or overheat. But when the operator pressed the accelerator, the bus pulled all 3 trailers with no strain. No battery drop. No hesitation. Just raw, continuous motion. The live stream chat erupted. Engineers in Europe openly doubted what they were seeing. Analysts in the US demanded real-time diagnostics. China instantly sent a request for collaboration. It didn't matter. The numbers were right there, impossible, undeniable, and live. But Africa wasn't finished. With the world watching, the engineers did the unthinkable. They opened the bus doors and revealed the internal energy module for the first time. Not fully, just enough for the camera to glimpse dense coils, compact circuitry, and an unfamiliar layout that didn't resemble batteries, fuel cells, or solar converters. And then, the lead engineer said the words that changed everything. This system is designed to last more than 35 years with near-zero maintenance. Viewers went silent. The chat stopped scrolling. Even experts froze. 35 years? That would mean entire fleets of buses running for decades without refueling, recharging, or replacement. Entire countries could operate independent of oil. Rural towns could power transportation without a grid. Cities could slash operating costs by 90%. You could almost feel the world shifting. As the live stream came to a close, the bus returned to the center of the runway, its lights glowing like a quiet promise of a future no one had predicted. The camera zoomed in, and the engineer delivered the final line. This bus is not just for Africa. It's for every place that believed progress had to be expensive. The screen faded out. Hours after the live stream ended, a quiet storm began brewing behind closed doors. A leaked internal memo, marked strictly confidential, do not forward, began circulating across private engineering circles, then onto encrypted forums, and finally onto the global web. It came from one of the world's top 3 EV manufacturers. At first glance, it looked like a standard corporate risk assessment. But the moment analysts read the first paragraph, jaws dropped. If Africa's self-powered transportation technology is real and scalable, our 5-year EV roadmap becomes obsolete. 5 years of planning, gone. Billions of dollars in battery factories, supply chains, and R&D, instantly threatened by a $5,000 bus from Africa. The memo went deeper. Battery-based EV infrastructure cannot compete with a power autonomous propulsion system. If deployment expands, lithium demand will collapse, charging networks will lose relevance, and global market share may invert. This wasn't fear. It was panic written in corporate language. The leak triggered chaos. Stock analysts scrambled to adjust projections. Energy investors froze. Consulting firms quietly began drafting transition strategies. In multiple countries, automotive boards scheduled emergency meetings. But the most dramatic reaction came from Silicon Valley. One of the biggest EV CEOs, known for dismissing competitors, held a private roundtable that evening. Leaked audio from that discussion soon hit social media. And in that audio, he said a single sentence that set the internet on fire. If they can mass-produce that bus, we're finished. For a man who rarely shows doubt, it was a seismic confession. Meanwhile, back in Africa, the engineering team remained silent. No press releases. No interviews. No victory celebrations. They simply locked down the facility and doubled security. Because they knew what was coming. The next morning, 2 diplomatic delegations landed unannounced, one from Europe, one from Asia. Their mission: negotiate early access, acquire licensing rights, secure influence before the world realized the magnitude of what had been demonstrated. But Africa wasn't easily swayed. Behind a sealed door in an underground lab, Maxwell and his team were reviewing new datasets captured during the runway stress test. One reading in particular made them fall silent. The energy module didn't just sustain the bus. It had generated significantly more power than expected, enough to run streetlights, small homes, or even auxiliary city systems. This wasn't just a transportation breakthrough. It was something bigger. Something governments had dreamed about for decades. Something oil producers feared. Something the renewable industry wasn't ready for. A mobility platform that doubles as a mobile power station. As Maxwell stared at the numbers, a slow smile formed. He knew what the world wanted. He knew what the corporations feared. He knew what the negotiations would become. But what he didn't know, at least not yet, was that a third delegation had landed in secret. No flags. No media announcement. No public acknowledgement. And they weren't coming to negotiate. Just before sunrise, security sensors around the facility began to register anomalies. Not alarms, subtle distortions. Signal interference. Encrypted pings bouncing between satellites and ground units that weren't on any official flight or diplomatic manifest. This was different. Inside the control room, one of the engineers froze while monitoring the spectrum analyzer. "These aren't commercial frequencies," he said quietly. "They're military-grade and masked." Maxwell didn't react immediately. He had anticipated resistance. What concerned him was the silence: no calls, no threats, no demands. Only observation. Careful. Patient. The kind that precedes intervention. Within hours, unmarked vehicles appeared miles away from the facility perimeter, parked just beyond public roads. Their occupants never approached. They didn't need to. Satellites, drones, and signal intelligence were already doing the work. But Africa had prepared for this moment. Weeks earlier, long before the live stream, the team had implemented a defensive protocol. Not weapons. Not force. Something far more unsettling to external observers: technological opacity. The energy module's core architecture could not be reverse-engineered through scans, emissions, or thermal analysis. Every attempt to profile it returned contradictory data. To outside intelligence agencies, it looked like a paradox. Meanwhile, the bus itself was no longer idle. At a secured location hundreds of kilometers away, 3 additional units, identical in performance, slightly different in design, were already operating. One carried commuters through a dense urban route. Another powered a rural transit line across uneven terrain. The third operated silently at night, supplying excess energy to nearby infrastructure while transporting goods. No announcements. No live streams. Just results. And that was when the public narrative began to fracture. Some media outlets doubled down on skepticism, calling it an illusion, a trick, a misunderstanding of physics. Others demanded independent verification. A few universities requested access for peer review. Online debates erupted. Engineers arguing against video evidence, economists arguing against the numbers, and ordinary people asking a simpler question. If it's fake, why is it working? Then something unexpected happened. A city council in a neighboring country released a short statement, barely 3 sentences long, confirming a pilot program using the self-powered buses for public transport. No branding, no spectacle, just confirmation. Within minutes, the statement was deleted. But screenshots never disappear. The implications were explosive. This meant the technology wasn't just being tested, it was being adopted. Quietly.
Strategically.
Without asking permission. Back at the facility, Maxwell received a message through a secure channel. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a warning.
Slow down.
The world isn't ready. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned to his team. They said the same thing about electricity, he said calmly, and about flight, and about the internet. Outside, one of the buses powered up again, its low hum echoing across the desert. Not loud, not dramatic, just constant, unstoppable. Because while governments debated, corporations panicked, and critics argued online, the buses kept running, generating, proving, silently, that the future doesn't ask for approval. And somewhere beyond the horizon, plans were already moving forward for the next phase, one that wouldn't just change transportation. The next phase began without an announcement. No press release, no countdown, no dramatic reveal. Instead, a simple logistical change quietly appeared on shipping manifests across 3 African ports. Containers marked as urban transport infrastructure were rerouted inland. To most observers, it meant nothing. To those watching closely, it meant everything. Inside those containers were not buses. They were modules. Compact, sealed units derived from the same self-powered system, scaled, simplified, and designed to be embedded anywhere. Markets, clinics, schools, water pumps, mobile towers. Each unit capable of generating continuous power while performing another task. Energy, without a grid. Infrastructure, without dependence. And once again, it was happening quietly. In one coastal city, streetlights that had gone dark for years suddenly stayed on through the night. No new power lines. No generators. Just light. In a rural region hundreds of kilometers away, a hospital reported uninterrupted operation for the first time in decades. Surgeons completed procedures without fearing outages. Refrigeration stayed stable. Lives were saved without anyone ever knowing why. The buses kept moving too, day after day, route after route. Fuel costs dropped to zero. Maintenance schedules stretched from weeks to months. Drivers stopped worrying about range. Passengers stopped asking questions. They only noticed that the bus always came and always worked. That's when the data started telling a story no one could ignore. Transportation costs fell by nearly 70% in test regions. Local economies responded immediately. Prices stabilized. Movement increased. Trade accelerated. Something subtle but powerful was happening. Energy scarcity was loosening its grip. And still, the outside world argued. On international panels, experts debated theories. Some claimed hidden batteries. Others suggested undisclosed charging systems. A few insisted the numbers must be wrong. But every argument collapsed under the same problem. The buses never stopped. No downtime. No charging. No degradation. Behind the scenes, pressure intensified. Offers arrived daily, some polite, some aggressive, some staggering in size. Patents. Exclusivity. Strategic partnerships. Even joint stewardship proposals from multinational coalitions. Each one carried the same underlying request. Control it before it spreads. But Maxwell's response never changed. This only works if it stays open. That sentence unsettled more people than any demonstration ever could, because open meant uncontrollable. As adoption quietly expanded, something unexpected happened inside the global energy market. Demand forecasts began slipping, not collapsing, just drifting downward. Analysts couldn't explain it. The changes were too small, too scattered. But the trend was unmistakable. Energy dominance was being challenged not by a rival superpower, but by decentralization. And that terrified everyone who had built systems around scarcity. Late one night, a message arrived from a research institute that had long dismissed the project. This time, there was no skepticism in their tone. Only urgency. We need to talk. Immediately. Not about the buses, about what comes next. Because they had seen the internal simulations. And they realized the buses weren't the breakthrough. They were just the proof. Proof that a world without centralized energy control wasn't theoretical anymore. It was already moving quietly through city streets. And the question was no longer if the world would change. As dawn breaks over the city, one of the self-powered buses glides silently through empty streets. No smoke, no noise, no urgency. Just motion, steady, reliable, inevitable. Streetlights powered by the same unseen system flicker off as the sun rises, having done their job through the night without drawing a single watt from the grid. Inside control rooms across the world, analysts stare at dashboards that no longer make sense. Old models fail. Forecasts unravel. The assumptions that once governed energy, transportation, and power quietly collapse under the weight of a simple truth. Scarcity is no longer guaranteed. And that changes everything. In Africa, there are no victory speeches. No declarations of dominance.
Just expansion.
More buses. More modules. More communities gaining access to something they were told would always be limited. The technology doesn't demand attention. It earns trust by working, day after day. Maxwell watches one final report scroll across the screen. Another region has gone fully operational. Zero fuel costs. Zero grid dependency. Full mobility. He turns away from the monitors. Because the future no longer needs supervision. Narrator. History rarely announces itself with explosions or applause. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, rolling through city streets, carrying ordinary people toward extraordinary change. The bus disappears into the morning traffic, indistinguishable now from any other vehicle, except for one thing.